In Derby seminars of years past, we have shown that horses coming into the race with only 2 preps as 3-year-olds are more likely to run a new top than those more heavily raced. In fact, that approach, which used to be considered unconventional, has now produced the last 6 Derby winners, and more trainers have decided less is more. But this year, that approach ran head-on into something else, the new Derby points system. It used to be that trainers whose runners had earned a lot as 2-year-olds had room to use any plan they wanted. But now the points are backloaded into the 3-year-old preps, and they have to find a way to both qualify and have them right on the day. It has become a very interesting chess game. As we point out every year, there are very few new tops run in the Derby, on average less than 2 horses a year. With 5 horses coming in off 2 preps this year, the number could be a little higher, but it's still unlikely to be more than 3 or 4 at the most, and some of those will be slow horses that aren't relevant. The other thing to keep in mind is that there is a lot of ground loss in the giant Derby field every year. And with there not being much too early speed this year, the field will stack up and some horses will give up 2 to 3 Thoro-Graph points racing wide. Clearly, if the rail is dead, it changes things. But assuming it's not, post, rider, and running style can be very relevant this year. Black Onyx wasn't too fast last year or this until his last, when he jumped way forward on polytrack. He would be likely to bounce regardless, but Rock Hard 10's runners so far have been much better on synthetic and grass than dirt. Charming Kitten is very similar to Black Onyx, with a slow 2-year-old top, a big jump last out on synthetic, and a grass synth pedigree. We don't like him now either, but with a strong full brother and a big figure already, this one may make a top grass horse. Falling Sky ran good sprint figures last year, and while he has done no developing since, he's been able to stay at that level around 2 turns. Both sides of his pedigree are sprinting, but since he could run his top at 1 1/8, we'll give him the benefit of the doubt. At some point, this colt will run a new top, and if he does it here and saves ground on the lead, he could get a check, assuming, of course, the rail is okay. Fear the Kitten was moderate last year and has been inching forward since. He's trained by Mike Maker, whose runners were exploding at Keeneland. But to the degree this one is capable of improving, the assumption is he would have done it in the bluegrass. He's too slow. Frack Daddy paired up strong tops around 2 turns last fall, looking every bit a future Derby contender. For whatever reason, he ran very poorly over the winter in Florida, but got back to his top the moment he left the state in the Arkansas Derby. This is a good pattern for a new top, but by now the division has caught up and passed him, so it would take a big jump to contend. This is especially true since he has a running style that could lead to ground loss, potentially a big problem in a huge field. Giant Finish jumped up when he got off dirt and onto synthetic. Unfortunately, the Derby isn't run on synthetic, at least not yet, and this horse isn't fast enough on either surface. Golden Soul is slow and has struggled to get back to his top at a time he should be moving forward. Golden Sense established a strong top and stayed at that level as a 2-year-old and eventually ran a new top to win the Santa Anita Derby last time out. To some degree, how you think he will react to that big effort depends on how seriously you think he was affected by getting caught up at a speed duel the race before. If you don't take that figure that seriously, the jump is less pronounced, and he's more likely to pair up. He also has a slight chance to break through with a new top since he's only developed 4 1/4 points from his 2-year-old top. Overall, he's a borderline contender. It's My Lucky Day is the most interesting and unusual Derby contender in many years. After establishing a strong top around 2 turns last September, he got hung very wide at Delta Downs, running much better than it looked. He came out with guns blazing at Gulfstream, throwing 2 huge figures, either of which would have a good chance of being good enough here. At that point, trainer Pleza made a totally unorthodox decision, giving him 8 weeks off and relying on 1 prep and 1 chance to get the needed points before the Derby. The colt didn't run a top, but ran well enough in the Florida Derby and now comes into this with a unique pattern. 13 weeks since the last big effort and 5 since his last race. In effect, Pleaser gave him his winter break a couple of months later than usual. Then what amounts to a one-prep 3-year-old campaign, even less than the 2 starts that's been working well. There are definitely pluses here. It's My Lucky Day is already fast enough to win without running a new top, and there's never been any indication super testing would affect Pleaser. And one more thing. If this colt does go forward off his last and wins a Derby, he'll still be relatively fresh and better positioned to go after the Triple Crown than any horse in recent memory. Java's War established a moderate 2-year-old top, broke through in a big way in his first start this year, then backed up a couple of points on synthetic last time out while winning the Bluegrass. Having already developed 5 points, it's not clear whether this colt can make another forward move so soon, and it'll have to come from far back in a field that will likely be bunched up behind a moderate pace, which means ground loss or traffic. By the way, if this sheet looks familiar, there's a reason, but I'll have another faced a much softer field and was able to win just by getting back to his top. It's very unlikely Java's War can. Lines of Battle was slow and showed no development through his 2-year-old campaign, then came out with a big new top in Dubai. Even if he handles the surface, he would have to improve a lot to contend here, and since he was clearly cranked up and pointed for that last one, real improvement is unlikely. My Loot showed a great 2-year-old developmental pattern reminiscent of Victory Gallop. He got back to his top in his second start this year, and with only 2 3-year-old starts and a good pattern, is one of the most likely to run a new top. But that's more likely to get him a small check than a big one. He starts out a little slow, and his running style has usually led to wide trips. If Rosie can figure out a way to save ground, his chances would improve considerably. Normandy Invasion marched straight down to a big 2-year-old top in Remsen, last year's best 2-year-old race by far. His Fairgrounds return was better than it looked due to a wide trip, and he returned to his top in the wood. The pattern here is similar to that of My Loot, with 2 preps and a return to his top as a jumping off point. And this one will also have to deal with coming from far back in a big field. But Normandy Invasion starts out significantly faster, and if he goes forward a couple of points, he has a chance to win the whole thing. Like Pleaser, Chad Brown gambled on qualifying for the Derby while setting himself up to actually have a chance to win it if he did, and it might really pay off. Orb didn't show that much last year, but moved forward a lot in a hurry after being put on Lasix at Gulfstream. Shug has been going great lately, and this one has a big shot to win just by pairing his last, which is not true of anyone else in the race. With 5 weeks rest both going into and since the Florida Derby, there's a decent shot Orb can do just that, making him a very strong contender. Overanalyzed ran even better than Normandy Invasion in last year's Remsen, but unlike that one, hasn't quite gotten all the way back to his top yet. We're suspicious of the timing of this one's 2 starts this year. He skipped a number of preps in late March and early April, and since Pletcher is very conscious of spacing, it's unlikely he chose to go 6 weeks to the prep but just 3 to the Derby unless he had to. Still, even if something was bothering this colt, he could be over it now, and he's one of several borderline contenders. Oxbow wasn't much last year, but had a good 3-year-old pattern until his last one. That was his 8th start in 6 months. He may be showing cracks, and now has to come back again in 3 weeks. Palace Malice came out running last July, and has basically developed not at all since, which leaves him well short of competitive here. Revolutionary was in a photo with My Loot last time, and is similar to that one in ability, and to some degree in pattern as well, with 2 preps and returned to close to his top. Though this one's 2-year-old campaign was not really as smooth, he too could be ready for a new top, but he too was a little short of competitive on number power. The thing about Pletcher horses is that they usually get to wherever they're capable of early in a campaign and develop less thereafter. So we like this one less than some others with similar figures. Calvin does help, however. Verrazano did not start at 2, which historically hasn't worked for the Derby, and there's a reason for that. If horses are ready to run at 2, people generally run them. So if they don't, it's usually because they're not ready. That means a horse that didn't run at 2 has to go from not ready to run to dealing with the stress of the Derby in just a few months. It also usually means going quickly from a sprint, as with Verrazano, to a mile and a quarter, and not only being fast enough on Derby Day, but fast enough earlier in preps to qualify. That's a ton of stress to put on a young horse. And while some have been able to run a figure that early in their career, it usually takes a big toll by the time they get to the Derby. Verrazano ran a huge figure in his second start, which was around 1 turn, and has not been able to get back to that level since. While the slight forward move last time could possibly be seen as a positive, the history of horses running in the Derby who come into the race without having run atop of their last 2 starts is not good, let alone this being one that got a late start and put in that big an effort that early. We would also point out that neither Verrazano's dam nor half-brothers stayed sound enough to race very often. This colt has a ton of ability, enough to be a strong contender, but we think there's a good chance he won't run well now or too often later. Vijay established a very good 2-year-old top sprinting for super trainer Rudy Rodriguez, and has shown he can get 2 turns this year. This gelding comes in with good figures and the pair of tops pattern that has been so strong in past derbies, but he's been treated for a lung problem since his last, reportedly with antibiotics. If that were not the case, we would like this horse, and he still makes us nervous, but we'll be a lot more interested in him next time if he throws the off race now. Will Take Charge was very slow until he jumped out of his skin to take the Rebel. Even a repeat won't do that much good, and a bounce is extremely likely. Vijay's problems got even worse with the draw. Verrazano's running style, Velasquez's riding style, and the post make a wide trip likely. But with a long run to the turn, the draw turned out not to seriously affect any of the horses we were interested in. There are basically 4 groups in this year's Derby. The first is comprised of total throwouts, either because they are too slow or because of surface considerations. Black Onyx, Golden Soul, Giant Finish, Palace Malice, Lines of Battle, and Charming Kitten. The second group is comprised of horses we don't really like, but can see possibly sneaking into the lower positions in exotics, either by jumping forward or big differentials in ground loss. Oxbow, Falling Sky, Will Take Charge, Frack Daddy, and Vijay. The third group consists of borderline contenders, horses that would not shock us if they won, but we don't like as much as the primary contenders. They are Revolutionary, Golden Sense, Overanalyzed, and Java's War. That leaves us with 4 primary contenders. Keeping in mind how few new tops are running the Derby, it's important to note that there are 3 horses in the field that on their best are 3 Thoro-Graph points or more faster than everyone else in the race. That's 6 lengths at the Derby distance, which is a lot. Of those, we like Verrazano the least, because he's the least likely to run his top, and at the morning line is an underlay. Of the three that remain, Normandy Invasion is not as fast as the other 2 and less likely to win. But he's extremely likely to run well. He's faster than most of the field and has a great pattern, making him a horse that actually could run a new top that is consequential, even as some of the fast ones run their race. The 2 most likely winners of this year's Derby are It's My Lucky Day and Orb. Both are really fast on their best, relatively fresh, and training well. They also have identical top Thoro-Graph figures. If only one fires, he will be a very likely winner. But if both fire, this could be quite a horse race and could lead to a nice rivalry.